All right, everybody. This is Project Herpetoculture Podcast, episode 62. I'm your host, as always, Roy Arthur Blodgett, joined, as always, by the very handsome and charismatic Philip Leitz, Verits Only. And we have an awesome show today with an excellent guest that I'm excited to get into conversation with. And before we do, we're going to go through our housekeeping as always. And first, I want to give a shout out to Dylan and the Animals at Home Network for hosting our show. We're super pleased to be part of this network. I also want to give a shout out to Charlie, who edits our audio and keeps us on the tracks over here. Also want to mention Custom Reptile Habitats. They're our first sponsor, and they make amazing premium PVC reptile enclosures. And they also have a whole product line with universal rocks, all kinds of good stuff. So if you're in the market for any of that and you're looking to make a purchase, if you do so through the link in our bio or description, we'll receive a small commission at no additional cost to you. And that's always really helpful. We also have Cold-Blooded Caffeine, and they roast amazing coffee from all over the globe. And they donate 5% of the proceeds from each bag of coffee sold to conservation in coffee growing regions. So if you're interested in trying out a new blend or single origin, please do so and use the code Project Herp for 10% off your order. And we also have Fairy Tale Dragons. That's Heather Moy and Ron St. Pierre, obvious legends. And they produce some incredible bearded dragons alongside a bunch of other cool obscure herps. And highly recommend just giving them a follow and seeing what they're up to. You'll always learn something from it. So yeah. And then for those of you who are interested in supporting the show directly with like a monthly donation, something like that, to help us keep the lights on over here, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/Project Herpetoculture. And we always welcome new patrons there. Am I missing anything, Phil, or is that?
No, I think that's good for now. We got some cool stuff coming up, man. I'll tell you what.
We do.
Yeah, we got a lot. I'm really pumped. I can't wait.
It's true. We are working on some cool stuff. Well, anyway, with all of that out of the way, I'm very pleased to introduce our guests, and that is Andrew and Sarah Gilpin of Living Art Creations. Welcome.
What's up, y'all?
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. How are things
for having
there?
us?
Hell yeah.
What's that?
How are things going over there?
Oh, pretty good. Just trying to get caught up on being gone a whole bunch this summer and wrapping up the breeding season, but still have a bunch of eggs left to hatch. So always got something going on here.
Nice.
Amazing.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So the way we kind of want to start, it's just the way we start every show. Can you guys tell us your individual sort of herpetocultural origin stories? Like how did this kind of weird hobby that we all participate in become a part of each of your lives?
Well, we kind of started it together. Andrew had a couple of odd pets, like a bearded dragon and some other geckos when I first met him. But then he got me my first crested gecko for my 16th birthday. And then it just kind of evolved from there naturally. We decided to pick up a few more crested geckos and try breeding them. And then before you know it, we have a whole room full of them, and then expanding into other species and everything too. So, but yeah, I would say we kind of started it together, really.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the herpetoculture side of things, it was pretty well together as far as like actually breeding. But we've always both just kind of been into looking for frogs and snakes, kind of like, most of the people in the hobby kind of start young and always finding stuff out there. But the field herping and photography side of things kind of came after we started breeding the geckos, because we got into photography to better represent the animals that we keep. And then that kind of like evolved into like getting into macro photography and then learning how to do all the photography out in the field. And so as I learned that, I would basically double up on all the camera gear. So Sarah was learning everything too. So we both do a bunch of photography and stuff too.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
I have a big like pet peeve with horrible photography. Like, I don't know why. I mean, for me, it was because I got a modest photographic education as a part of my college career, just because I went to art school. So I took photography courses. And so as soon as you realize like how easy it is, or how easy it can be rather, to take decent quality photographs, or at least clear photographs.
Yeah.
You know, it became this thing where it's like, my God, I just hate seeing crap photos. It drives me nuts.
Well, and back, I guess we probably got our first semi-real camera in like 2005. I actually won one of those stupid radio call-in contest things.
Really?
And it was for when like a PlayStation Portable first came out. And it was to win a PlayStation Portable, but it wasn't actually sponsored by PlayStation. So they actually just cut you a check to go buy one. And I was like, I'm kind of overplaying video games at this point. So I went and bought a camera.
Oh, wow.
And then I just kind of like upgraded from there, starting with like a kind of a prosumer little camera that allowed you to do some manual adjustments and had like a manual focus and stuff before I got into like a DSLR. But also back in 2005, 2006, like point and shoot cameras were really bad.
Oh, yeah.
And so like the image quality there was really bad. And then there weren't like you didn't really have cell phones just popping off like decent quality pictures. Now it's like you can get some pretty damn good quality stuff just with a cell phone. So
yeah. It's so funny that you mentioned that too, because I have weird memories of like in the very, very early 2000s, like 2003, 2002, like using straight up disposable Kodak cameras, trying to like take pictures of the bearded dragons that I had, you know what I mean? And like going to get them developed and like just being like, this is terrible. This doesn't look like what I wanted at all.
I went back and found some, because I had this like, I don't know what it was, like a 4 megapixel, like $100 Samsung. And I look back at some of those pictures and
remember that 2K picture?
Dude, it looks like somebody took it in like a 1998 version of Photoshop and then tried to make it into like a, like artistic style, like I don't know what's the art where they do like a bunch of tiny little dots.
Oh yeah, pointillism.
Yes.
Yeah. So it looked like that, but then if you were to like smudge it in Photoshop, it was so awful.
Oh my God.
Start somewhere.
So it's gotten a little better since then, I suppose.
Yeah. With the steps of a turtle, I guess that's what it always feels like. Just to some degree.
It's funny. I mean, there's only a few things that really go into getting a quality photo, but learning how to put them all together for whatever it is you're specifically doing and learning all the, the priorities for what you're trying to do, is what makes it difficult. So, but if you take it one step at a time and learn what each feature is and how to do it, it's not as difficult, I think, as what most people make it out to be, but it's definitely a long learning curve to do it well consistently.
Yeah,
for sure.
And it's obviously so intimidating. I think sometimes people look at, and I understand why, right? I mean, you pick up like a fancy DSLR and you start learning about like f-stop and, like exposure and lighting, camera raw. You're just like, what? I know.
Just trying to swap lenses and like, even if somebody else, like I know my Canon stuff, like the back of my hand, but somebody hands me a Nikon or a Sony, I'm like, stalls me for a couple minutes until I just figure out where everything's at,
Yeah.
I recently switched from I had like just like an old Canon Rebel that was like my main, DSLR for a really long
that's
time.
What I started with.
Just like, the entry level thing, that everyone starts with. And then I recently got like a Sony mirrorless, and I'm like, I'm so intimidated by it because I'm just so used to the Canon still. And it's just like, I can't, even though it's like objectively a much nicer camera that I have now, I can't get the quality of photos I was getting, as with the consistency as I had for my Rebel.
It just goes to prove though, like I tell a lot of people, like, unless you're using like some super crappy camera, like learn how to use what you've got and then you should have a reason for why you upgrade. You can still take excellent photos of the 20-year-old camera, but my keep rate and certainly like the ability to crop in with higher megapixels or just, better autofocus is going to give me a higher hit rate for what's a keeper.
Oh yeah.
Maybe spend less time screwing around trying to get a quality shot or whatever, but
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So what was like,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just curious. I mean, since we're talking photography, I'm curious, like you talk about this learning curve, like how did you start to learn? Was it just trial and error, or did you like pursue a book class?
I started with what I call like a prosumer. So it's not like a tiny little point and shoot. It has like a built-in zoom. It allows you to like take macro photos where you can manually like adjust the focus, and then you can adjust aperture and shutter speed and white balance. And so my brother-in-law at the time was taking had taken a photography class at the University of Iowa. And so he just kind of taught me, okay, here's how you adjust aperture, shutter speed, white balance, ISO. And I mean, really, that's all you're looking at for the most part to like do something decent. And so it's like, you just pick one thing, you learn what that one thing does and how to adjust it. And then you just learn how all of them kind of work together. And then you learn how to prioritize that. Like, okay, well, do I have flash or not? It's going to make a big difference in whether, I'm getting the proper exposure and stuff. And then I just kind of add pieces in. So I started with that camera and actually was able to get pretty good results even with that. It's got a little hot shoe on it. So you can put a hot shoe flash on it and bank it into like a piece of cardstock or whatever. And you could take some pretty solid photos with even, now you probably get the camera for $50.
Yeah.
And then I went into a Rebel. I think my first one was a Rebel XT. And then
I think you got some tips from Randy May too, didn't you?
Yeah, I got some tips from a guy named Randy May. He was a crested gecko breeder back in the day that did some really high quality photos and kind of recommended some Alien V Studio flashes for me, just so I could get like consistent, results. Because I really like doing macro photography, and trying to do that inside is pretty much impossible without using flash.
Right.
So he made some recommendations, and then it was just trial and error. I mean, I didn't do any photography with film, so coming into it with digital is really nice for like just taking pictures and learning what works and what doesn't work. And I tell people all the time, like, and it goes the same way with herpetology too. Like, you try new stuff, and it doesn't always work out, but either way, it's a learning experience, right? Like you learn, okay, well, this works or this doesn't work, and then you roll it into the next thing. And almost every single time, I mean, I still try new stuff almost every single time I take the camera out. And sometimes it's a waste of time and it doesn't work and it's not any better, but I at least know whether it helps or not. And, I still talk to crested gecko breeders that I know have been keeping stuff as long as we have about how to keep hatchlings. It doesn't mean we don't know what we're doing, but it's like we take the most basic thing and we break it down and then we rebuild it and see if there's a better way to do it,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's just that process of continual refinement, that I feel like is part of what makes it rewarding.
It's pretty funny to think though, like if somebody were just come into this conversation with, say, me and a buddy or somebody that I've never met before, and we're having conversations about how you set up a hatchling crested gecko or whatever species it may be, they'd be like, who is this guy? Like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But really, like I said, it's trying to do a better job of what we know works, but might be able to do it just a little bit better,
Oh yeah,
totally.
And there's definitely something to be said for being willing to re-examine things that you might otherwise take for granted, because there's always something you can change. I mean, the way I keep like a group of hatchling Euros is totally different than it was 5-6 years ago. And I mean, it might not look that way to the sort of like the observing eye, but to me, it's like a totally different ball game, and depending on the scale that you're doing it at, depending on the sort of goals that you have in rearing something, all of those things will influence what, like, the kind of choices you make in setting things up. I mean, I love hearing that. I love hearing like the desire to kind of regularly like try to crank up the volume on your game. It's awesome. That's a super cool thing to hear about. Funny anecdote mentioning about you mentioned like film camera, never having shot with film. The photography class I took in college, my professor Gary Emmerich, he made us. The whole first half of the semester was shooting with film, and so he was. And I had like this old Pentax camera that you could drive a nail with. You know what I mean? Like this big hammer of a thing. And God damn it, the number of images I completely ruined because I didn't I wasn't able to like spin the film into the reel to put it in the developer, and I messed it up, and I would just fuse them all the negatives together. And I'm like, God damn it. Like,
it's funny now, because like I feel like I could work backwards obviously into film because I actually understand what everything does, right? But trying to start there and then work into digital would be,
Oh,
I mean, I would understand the process. Certainly I get it, but now I don't think there's any point in doing that. It's just a waste of, it's just a waste of, it's just a waste of film.
Yeah. A huge material waste, and like being in a dark room and like using all of like the chemicals, like the, you know, the developer and the stop and all these fluids, and like you're sitting there in low light. It's super weird. I mean, it was admittedly it was very cool. Like at the time, I felt highly artistic. I was like, I am really at the top here, you know, like
that was also like 02, 03, even into like 05, 06 was like, like wedding photographers and stuff weren't even really touching into digital until digital until like 05, 06.
Oh yeah.
Like
and like newer. I go back and like look at our wedding photos. I'm like, these are freaking terrible. we paid money for this. Like
Brian Susan take 10-year anniversary photos for us. Those are much better.
Yeah, those are
nice. Yeah, he's got some skills.
That dude's the man. That dude is great. So I'd like to ask a little bit more about sort of like the development of the work you guys do. And I'm a little bit struggling for words in terms of exactly how to ask this question, but like, was it a very gradual linear progression for you, or were there moments where, you know, there was this like realization like, it's time for us to really step up our game? And did you guys set out with a goal to reach a specific point in terms of your, like the infrastructure that you guys are seated in front of behind you, or is it something that happened as out of necessity? I mean, I'm genuinely curious about some of the details behind how the development process was for you guys.
Well, it started with just a bunch of random species we were keeping for fun. And we kept like a lot of Europlatus and most of the New Caledonian, you know, Brachydactylus. But it was in very limited numbers. I like frilled dragons and just stuff like that. And then it kind of got to a point where it's like, you got 50 different random styles of cages, right? That's a huge pain in the ass to work with when you're like, this cage opens on the top, this cage opens on the front, this cage, the door flips up or whatever. And so we decided that we just really kind of wanted to streamline stuff. I used to make like custom cages and stuff too, or modify aquariums to have like sliding glass front doors or whatever. And it's just such a pain in the butt after a while to like go through that stuff. So we started kind of streamlining the cages and stuff, like 2014, 2013.
Species too, like just trying to keep more of like similar temperature and habitat just to streamline things even more. But but I feel like it was pretty gradual too.
Yeah.
And it's like a natural.
As far as like production of animals and like turning it into a business, that was like, it's basically been a full-time business for both of us for probably 6 years.
Oh, wow.
Well, we didn't actually, maybe even, I mean, probably could have done it 10 years ago. So we were basically working both full-time plus doing close to the same number of animals as what we're doing now up until a couple of years ago. And then I started dropping hours at work, or I'd like just do a half day or whatever. And my job was pretty flexible. So I'd kind of like cut half a day here, and then it's like, all right, I'm cutting to just half days only. And then it's like, all right, what, like doing half days, honestly, I got just as much done doing like, I don't know, like a half day as if I just done a full day of work, because by the time I'd get home and actually get working on stuff and eat lunch and whatever, it's like, I just didn't feel like I was really gaining much by doing by half days. So I just said, you know, I'm kind of done with it. January of 2022.
Oh, wow.
And then Sarah was November of 23 that she went full time with this stuff.
No,
so
22 a year ago.
Oh, 22. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, wow. That's excellent. Very cool.
But in order to do so, I mean, we never relied on the income from the animals. That was always just like we already had all the house payments and everything paid. It was just kind of fun money and to like travel. But we wanted to
invest back into like the caging or misting system or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
All back into the animals.
So
Yeah.
We decided though that like at a certain point, if we've got enough money set aside to like do house payments for a couple of years, and that's you're never going to have a better time to kind of jump ship than when you're set for a year or two for everything.
Right.
Yeah.
To have that cushion and not feel like you're scrambling to really make ends meet. And I think that would be super hard to do in this business.
Oh yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be tricky. That's for sure. That's crazy. Really cool though. I mean, it's also, I also think it's pretty remarkable that you guys are like a spousal team with this, you know. I feel like so many of the people that we speak to, you know, with the rare exception, obviously we've had, you know, like we've had a handful of couples or people who both, you know.
Yeah, it sounded like Frank Payne got his wife in helping out. I just watched that one, and then so I mean, there's definitely people that do it, but I don't know how. I mean, in some aspects, like not having your partner or spouse, like they're maybe making some decisions harder. Like she wants to keep something, I just want to sell it, or I want to get something, and she says we can't get any more animals. I guess having like your own separation to kind of do what you want is maybe beneficial, but certainly more beneficial to have, you know, twice as much help doing everything. I mean, honestly, it takes us even combined like 3 to 4 days just to update availability by the time we do like photography, get it on the website, get it on Morph Market. It can be a 3 to 5 day process almost full time.
Fascinating.
Wow.
Well, so this is I was actually hoping we could talk about this, and I hope you guys don't mind my asking, but like, can you elaborate on like how do you guys divide up the work? I mean, do you guys have preferences about what you prefer to do and what you prefer not to do? And, you know, like, does one person sort of get like purview over like, well, I'm going to be the one taking the available photos because I don't like the way yours turn out. Or, I mean, you know, I mean, I imagine
let him do the photography because I don't want to, he is better at it, but I usually do all like the entry into like the spreadsheets and get the animals deli cupped and like prepared so that we have a good like assembly line.
We deli cup everything like for 15 to 60 minutes or so before we photograph it so that it can fire up, you know, and color up. And so she'll be deli cupping, she'll be entering stuff into like a spreadsheet, and I'll be grabbing them and I'm shooting them while she's just moving like 2 to 3 rows of animals who've always got like a queue of 20 to 30 cages that are ready to go. And then I'm just going through them and popping the photos, and then they're all just kind of in order already on the spreadsheet. So,
wow, that's really cool. Wow. And you know,
just tag team the post processing and uploading onto the website and everything.
Excellent. Wow. Yeah.
But as far as like cleaning cages and feeding and stuff, it's like we basically just end up figuring out an area that works. Like I'm freaking slow at everything I do. Like it doesn't matter what it is, like I take my time and I'm super slow at it. So like to feed 400 bins, you know, would take me quite some time. So I'll take a section of 60 and then I'll do all the adults and I'll look for eggs and I'll go through and I'll kind of like I'll take my dear sweet damn time doing that stuff, and then it takes her the same amount of time to feed, you know, 10 times as many cages as what I'm doing. But since I'm freaking slow at it, it makes sense that, okay, I'm going to pull these apart and I'm going to look for eggs in the cages and stuff like that while I'm going, you know?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Makes sense. Extremely interesting. Well, were there any, like in getting up to this point, were there people who either or both of you looked to as sort of examples in herpetoculture that you say you admired, you looked up to, and then sort of secondarily, were there any kind of influences? Do you guys look to any people sort of outside herpetoculture for influence in what you do?
Well, I first realized that you could have a business breeding reptiles when I was in 5th or 6th grade. My aunt and uncle's neighbor had snakes in his basement, and I got invited over to help clean cages one day, and then I got a bearded dragon in return for helping clean cages. So that was kind of an eye-opener for me. I was like, okay, I mean, I guess like this guy wasn't like doing it as a living, but he had enough to, you know, make some money doing corn snakes and bearded dragons and stuff. And then after that,
Let's say Alan.
Yeah, we met Alan Rapace at a Tinley Park show, I think in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know who he was, and he didn't have a name band or anything like that. And I was looking through his animals. I was like, man, you got some really nice stuff. And he was like, yeah, what do you got? And I was showing him some pictures and stuff. He's like, oh yeah, these are really nice. And I just bought at the time the most expensive crested gecko I'd ever bought. I think it was like $285.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, that's really nice. And he's like, where'd you get it from? And I told him, he's like, oh yeah, it probably came from me. Because he knew who it was. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, so where'd you get some other stuff from? And so I was like, told him some places. And I was like, I got some other animals, I think, from so-and-so, but I think they came from Alan Rapace. And I'm telling this to him to his face. And he was like, oh, hi, I'm Alan Rapace. And I was like, oh, hi, I'm a jackass.
I've done that. I've done that exact. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was on his forum at the time, and I was kind of like a know-it-all newbie, have to post on everything kind of person,
Yeah.
And he was able to kind of like reroute me and harness me into actually being helpful instead of like thinking I'm being helpful, but just being overbearing.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? There's always the people that are there doing that kind of stuff. So I was that guy for a while. And so I helped him just organize some pages and stuff on his forum. And then at the time, I was doing some photography, and Sarah was a vet tech. Mm-hmm. And so he actually flew Sarah and I out to his place to microchip his Leachianus collection.
Whoa.
Wow.
And so we microchipped over a couple of days, like a couple hundred Leachianus, and like entered them into an Excel spreadsheet. So you could scan them, punch the number in, and it would take you to photos and all the information on the animals. Wow. It was pretty freaking sweet. We were microchipping geckos down to like 10 grams? Yeah. 10 grams, I think.
Wow.
Holy moly.
That's amazing.
But it was pretty cool because he had a bunch of, irreplaceable, wild caught animals that if like multiple get out and get mixed up by his employees, then they're kind of like, okay, I don't know for sure what this is. So
right.
You get it to a point where you can scan an animal, you know exactly what it is, even if it's been out for a month and 3 or 4 other animals have gotten out in the same time frame.
Wow.
Amazing.
Damn, that's some next level systemization there.
That's a whole other level.
Well, Alan is very business mind oriented and also really likes to kind of see what he can do with some of that stuff. So what he wanted to do was like have us travel to like some of the bigger reptile shows around the country and microchip other people's animals.
Wow.
So then you could have like a database of like, okay, these animals came from so-and-so, or every animal that Alan and Philippe sell is microchipped and has all the information right there. The biggest issue with that is most people can't just bring animals into a reptile show. He was going to pay 10 or 15, only charge like 10 or $15 to have it chipped and have it punched in. And then it's all kind of recorded or whatever. And then the other issue is most people aren't going to invest $400 or $500 into the required equipment to be able to scan a microchip.
Right.
Yeah. That's true.
It was a cool idea though.
Yeah,
definitely.
Cool. I mean, we had him on the show as well. And I'm always struck by people who are able to take like a different kind of maybe a relatively unique orientation towards the world and apply it to a specific endeavor. I mean, that's a really, really innovative intellectual approach to something that like I don't know a lot of people who approach herpetoculture that way. I mean, surely not trying to throw anybody under the bus. They're out there, right? There's lots of people doing interesting things. But when you meet someone who's, taking something and applying a system like that to their entire collection, not only does it seem brilliant in terms of problem solving capacity, but it's also like, wow, that's actually really cool. I never would have thought to do that myself. How intriguing,
And then he hires a couple of early 20-year-olds that have some vet tech experience and some photography experience for the cost of plane tickets and a vacation to California probably only cost him a total of a few $1,000 with all the chip and everything, and then have to pay somebody else to do it all for him.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
Yeah, he is. He's a brilliant dude. Very brilliant.
But then he ended up flying us out there a couple more times for just photography stuff and whatever. We helped him out at a couple of shows and stuff out there. But other than that, it's just, other friends that we've met along the way that are doing similar things, or, seeing who's doing what on the forums and pages and stuff that we look up to, and try to mimic what they're doing or make it work for us in a different but similar way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Are there people or concepts or anything outside of herpetoculture that you have a tendency to like refer back to? Like just as an example, for me, I'm like almost always relating everything to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because that's the other thing that I do. And I'm sure it's kind of annoying for people, they're like, God damn, dude, this guy's talking about Jiu-Jitsu again, which I get it. It's fine. It's a problem, but I don't know. Is there anything like that for you two?
So for me, I would say I was a mechanic for 18 plus years. And so I like to be able to take stuff apart, and ideally when I put it together, I don't want to have to take it apart again.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure it's done right the first time. But if I do have to fix something, I want to be able to take it apart. So this room that we're in now is now when I try to do something, I run it through my mind 3 or 4 times before I put a freaking screw into anything. Right. I'm like, well, what am I going to have to take this apart in 6 months? What's going to suck about that?
Right.
And I feel like his dad, he takes a lot after his dad, who passed away a few years ago now, but he actually helped us build this room. But I see so much of like his dad's tendencies and his like
OCD.
Yes. Well, but yeah, just making sure things are done right. What was the saying? He always had to do it. I can't remember. But anyway, that's what it reminds me of.
Do it right the first time. You don't have to do it again.
Yeah, basically
something like that. But yeah, so basically, like I kind of just almost all the cages in here are mounted like cabinets on the walls with like a 4-inch gap, so I can run my arm corner of the wall to corner of the wall, and nothing's in the way, and I can put lights in there. If a gecko gets out, everything's up 4 inches off the ground. It can run straight to the wall, and it's got nowhere to go.
Right.
So it keeps in here in the Midwest, it gets pretty cold. I mean, there's some sections of the floor in here in the winter that get 55, 60 degrees.
Oh yeah.
And so I've got everything up off the ground. I've got almost everything with herp stats with 20-watt puck lights that are dimmable and temperature controlled by the lights, or almost all of the perimeter walls are lined with heat tape on every single bin. So it's pretty well temperature controlled. We've got an ERV, an energy recovery ventilation unit. And the reason for that is because I can't open the windows. There's no more windows in here. I had to cover them all up with the cages. But when you do have windows, you can't open them from November to March.
Yeah.
Or longer. So it gets pretty stagnant. So I installed a unit that has a separate incoming and outgoing air control. And so I can crank one up and have the other one turned down, or vice versa. And I can run them for, say one of them on high and one of them low, and have them both only cycle for say 10 minutes an hour or 60 minutes an hour. So in the winter, I have it dialed back to maybe doing like a full air exchange, like twice a day in here. But when it's nice out, I have that thing cranking all the time, and it's got like basically equivalent to like a radiator or an intercooler on a car. So any air that's coming in gets temperature matched to about 70% of whatever air is going out. So it's not wasting hot or cold air.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And then it filters it too. So I have the fresh air right at the front door when you walk in. So it's not like, whoa. And then I have the exhaust air popped out like the furthest point away from the entrance. So those are separate. And then you can split off vents and run different vents and stuff off it too, but I'm just running the two.
Wow. Man, that sounds
amazing.
Awesome. I am beyond jealous of that. Like
it's a pretty slick setup. And I mean that, it comes from like, okay, I have like a cockroach closet at the old place, and we put a bathroom exhaust fan in there. It's like, all right, well, like that's fine. And it's on a light switch. Okay. Well, how frequently are you going to run that? If you run it all the time, that closet's 55 degrees in the winter.
Yeah.
You can't have that. So you just kind of run it when you think about it, or it gets freaking nasty in there. But being able to have this thing just basically run at whatever levels that I want it at is pretty slick. So this time of year, I have it cranked down pretty low because it's starting to get about freezing at night. But it's still, like I said, it still does a full like air exchange about twice a day right now. So at least it's keeping some airflow going.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Sure. Wow, man, that's really cool. Extremely cool.
With that difference with the airflow, have you noticed any difference with your animals? Like any positive, obvious benefits to that, or anything like that?
I think it's hard to gauge because it's like, I mean, any airflow is good,
Right.
in my opinion, assuming you're not like drying a cage out so bad that it like, zaps the humidity and desiccates an animal. But it's kind of hard to gauge because the fresh air is like all the way on one side and the exhaust air is like way off in another end. So there's still like some kind of stagnant parts of the room. We do run a couple other just like small little swivel fans kind of strategically placed and like little computer fans and stuff placed here and there just to like take air out of one corner that's not nearby and kind of push it into the middle of the room to kind of create a more positive airflow.
Right.
But we definitely still have some areas that are more stagnant than others. I think overall it's beneficial. I can't say for sure, to what degree.
Yeah, totally. Wow. And I'm curious about like, so this, like what iteration of your reptile room are we at now?
We started in a mobile home with cages in the hallway, our bedroom, and like another bedroom. And then we bought a house and we basically purpose built that one kind of similar to this. But that was more just like, okay, we've got a shitload of outlets everywhere, because that's fantastic. Yeah. And then it's got a few dedicated breakers and stuff like that. But then it's like build it up to having some of these cages here, like on islands that are mobile and a misting system, and you kind of work through it. But this is probably, we had a temp room here while we were building this one because it took us about 2 years to finish this room. Because Sarah and my dad and I did everything here while we were keeping everything upstairs or at our old house. So we kept everything at our old house for like 2 or 3 months before we moved it to the new place, which is kind of nice not having to like try to have everything ready to go and show the house. With hundreds of animals and stuff there seems like it would be super stressful and kind of a nightmare. So it also made it so we could just kind of fix that place up and just rent it also instead of like having to dump it. But I'd say
spend more time making this like exactly what we wanted based off of everything we learned from the other rooms,
for sure,
previous places, that we didn't like. So yeah, this is pretty. I mean, I don't know how much else we could really make it better.
It's
so
hard
that was
to
my next question is like what remains, because like it seems like that from my perspective outside looking in, like wow, this is
I've got a few things like maybe figure out how to freaking keep the spiders down would be a good one. That's a freaking nightmare. And then I figured out how to get like another 90 shoebox bins in here. But having everything mounted to the wall looks great and functionally is fantastic, but it makes it an absolute nightmare when you have to move anything. Because I have like brackets on the walls that I screw everything into. And so to fit what I wanted to, I had to like juggle other racks and stuff around. And I had to move like 3 separate sections of cages that were all in one spot and juggle them around to get that in. And it took us like, this is, of course, between feeding and doing everything else we have to do. It took us like 5 days just to like juggle the stuff around and actually get it remounted. Plus, when I mount the stuff, it's like the OCD kicks in. Like
we spent hours.
I shim everything to get it so it's like flush on the front. And you don't realize how much mudding and taping like drywall and stuff adds like little waves and shit in the drywall. And so trying to shim that with like foam and old flooring tiles and whatever you've got to like shim it out and make it flat on the front's a real pain. I'm always working with like the misting system, just trying to get that perfectly dialed in and lighting stuff and not something specifically in the room, but maybe add solar so that all of the reptile stuff is offset by cost wise for me to add solar is not really worth it as far as like breaking even or making, some kind of value on it, but just to know in my mind that it's a wash on the reptile side of things is worth the cost for me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll be looking into that a bit more. I've got estimates and stuff. I just haven't pulled it off yet. And then even just stuff like we clean every single food bowl and water bowl we use here. So we're using, and this goes back to like some of the stuff you guys have talked about, which is like, what kind of impact can you have, whether it's good or bad, as far as like keeping the business green, or are you negatively affecting potentially, local wildlife here, or just dumping stuff in the landfill. So a lot of New Caledonian keepers use egg flats just for like stuff for animals to climb on and hide in the bins.
Right.
We've completely eliminated all of that. And I just calculated it. I can't remember for sure right off the top of my head, but we just now swapped out the 3/4 ounce portion cups a couple months ago that we'd been using since like the middle of 2020.
Wow.
And that's washing them nonstop. And then all of a sudden they started getting like little pinholes and stuff in them, but I was able to clean them and recycle them. And I counted and weighed those. And it was like, I think I calculated out to be like 300 or 400 pounds of plastic.
Wow.
And like a couple 100,000 cups.
Whoa.
And we ultimately were able to recycle. And before that, we were just pitching them every single feeding.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So even just doing stuff like that, it's a little bit of a pain. It's a little more work certainly than just chucking the plastic cups right in the trash, but it makes me feel a lot better. And I don't have the expense of those, portion cups or anything else. So we've just figured out how to effectively clean them efficiently. We actually use our clothes washer. And we just throw them straight into laundry bags in 5-gallon buckets. And we just run them through the clothes washer.
Pre-rinse on them and then throw them.
Yeah.
Wow.
It works pretty well.
Works out
amazing.
Good. You'd think it would just beat the snot out of those cups.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would expect it to just destroy them.
No, it's I turn the spin cycle down lower, and then we run them for like basically the maximum amount of time that you can run. And I don't run like super hot water in there because that makes them break down, and then you can't do like a full laundry bag because that's like a lot of weight. Getting slammed around. So I'll break like one day's worth of cups down into like 2 or 3 bags. So it's 2 or 3 things tumbling around instead of one giant one getting slammed.
Yeah.
And that makes them last quite a bit longer too. So
Wow.
One of my buddies does the same thing, and he's got quite a few more animals than we do. So it works.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah. And
so
like,
cool.
What did you end up replacing some of those things with, right? So instead of like
the egg flats.
Yeah.
Have you seen the heavier duty like plastic mesh that some of like the arboreal snake keepers use? Then they just like put it in like an arch or like a little grid in the cage just for the snakes to climb on. We're just using that. And then we just got some artificial plants that we clean. And then I do run like a small square deli cup with like a little sphagnum for like a human hide in the cages. Yeah, this is like a pretty basic like hatchling setup. So you got your arch, you got your little arch piece, fake plant, piece of bark, and then a little square cup with sphagnum moss in it. And then there's a little Powerade cap for water, and then a little food bowl in there. But
it's awesome.
We move them up to like a bark substrate after a while. But I mean, honestly, even getting rid of the egg flats, because those things mold pretty bad.
Right.
And they're freaking I just hate it. Plus, some of those things are freaking nasty. Like, you don't really know what's recycled in there or what those damn things were drug around in. I'm like, who knows what's in that shit? Like, it's obviously recycled paper, like paper pulp stuff, but it's like, you don't really know what's thrown in there, and you get like a whole stack of them, and some of them just smell like a little off. And I'm like, man, I don't know what the hell is in all that. So we've got definitely like reduced shedding issues, and like I don't have to swap them out just because the egg flats are moldy, because nothing in there molds now. So it works out pretty good. So our only consumables really obviously are like food. But as far as like a waste product is paper towels. We go through a fair amount of paper towels, which sucks, but at least it's biodegradable. And
right.
And the mulch that we use, I just chuck out in the yard after it gets full of gecko crap. So
yeah. I have periodically used those egg flats as well, for the same reason with baby Euros, trying to add surface area, trying to add visual barriers without adding a ton of weight to the enclosure. But with the baby Euros, so for example, let's say I would have like an egg flat and then I'd lay a square tile over the top of it, right? And that would be a basking platform. The Euros would go underneath the tile into the egg flat and scratch and dig at the egg flat. And so then you'd pick up
shred it.
Oh, they would just shred it apart and it would be this dust. It's like, and it's like, I don't know if they eat it sometimes. I don't know, obviously it doesn't seem to be hurting them necessarily, but it's not cool. It's gross. It adds a bunch of work to cleaning. I mean, it's terrible. And at the end of the day, it's just like, forget it. I'm making everything stone. God damn it. So.
Well, yeah. And I mean, at least for us, we're talking for the most part, like sub 20 gram geckos, they're pretty small. I would imagine, I don't know what an average Euromastix hatchling weight is, but it's probably about equivalent to a 1/2 to 3/4 grown crested gecko, I would think.
Yeah, I would say probably, about half. Yeah, they'll hatch any, depending on the species, some species will hatch out at like 5-6 grams. Some of them will hatch out at 20 grams. It just depends on the, on which one. But yes.
Comparable to whatever an island locale Leachianus or GTA Leachianus is about equivalent.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so that's really cool. I love hearing that kind of stuff. It's so fun to find ways of making improvements to what you do. And
I will tell you, it was a massive pain in the ass cutting like 400 pieces of that plastic mesh down.
Oh yeah,
because that shit, if you don't like get it really nice, is pretty sharp.
Oh yeah,
you have to cut it like directly across the seam, and man, I bet I had total, because I can only do like maybe a couple hours at a time before my hand is just like completely screwed.
Yeah.
I bet I had on and off of like 5 or 6 days of cutting that crap to get it to like fill all the cages. It freaking sucked.
The other thing we noticed with changing that from the egg flat was a lot better feeding response too when we put live food in the cages, because they can actually see it. The crickets don't hide, or dubia don't hide. So we've had a lot better response that way too. Well,
and I think that,
very cool.
Granted, I think a lot of animals honestly are not a fan of hanging out on cork bark, but we all use it. I think they're all like, this is pokey and jabbing me and nothing's comfortable about this. We all still use it because it's readily available. But I don't think there's anything much worse than like an egg flat for something to try to lay on.
Oh yeah.
Like a hatchling crested gecko just finds like a little nook in it. It's like, this is fine. But it's like when you're laying across like 3 or 4 of those freaking humps, it's got to, I think the things literally just cruise the cages trying to get out, because there's no good spot for them to just kind of hang out. So I think that there's sort of a benefit there, at least on the plastic mesh. They can just kind of like drape over it, and it helps utilize more of the vertical space in these little shoe boxes too. So
this is interesting. Really? I feel like this is a great example of something where the way you're describing these observations to me indicate a level of like attention, awareness, and responsiveness to your own animals that I feel like is just admirable beyond belief. We
appreciate that. It kind of it goes back to, even just like getting into like macro photography. Like our little motto for our business is seeing the details in life. And that's for like the macro side of it. But we also take that attention to detail into other stuff. So I'm not saying that we keep everything naturalistic. I'm not saying that we keep everything like pristine in here, but we do try to at least maximize like how stuff is doing. And if we see something where we don't feel like something is doing the best, we try to figure out a way to make it better, where we can. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's pretty cool. I mean, I think it's sort of emblematic of the ways where I think if you're keeping one animal or a small number, like three to five animals, you might notice some stuff if you're very observant. And of course, you're going to get to know those individual animals very well. But like having that sort of, that like, sort of almost global perspective over such a large number of animals across many years and seasons is like, it's kind of an invaluable thing. It's weird the way there's almost like an exponential, rate of like learning that can happen. Like something that's been a little bit weird this year in particular, for me anyway, has been, just as a random example, uromastics are so hard to pin down in terms of how they're going to inherit coloration and pattern. They're so polymorphic. It's really, really hard. There are some weird little bits of inheritance where you're like, oh, that one kind of looks just like his dad, or, whatever. But knowing how to predict it and what to expect out of it is like, it's just not going to happen. And I'm getting to a point now where all of a sudden I have a handful of clutches from a handful of crosses that like never really happened, even though I've had the animals for like 10 years. I've just never bred animal X to animal Y. And being able to see like a distinct difference, it's like, oh, hey, neat. Like finally something weird. So, I can finally point to this damn thing and be like, hey, look, this was like a totally different result. And I didn't expect it. It's so freaking fun. It's just a random example.
Crested geckos are considered polymorphic, and up until 5-10 years ago, people would say, okay, yeah, this is probably a recessive trait, or whatever's going on here, but we don't really know for sure. And there's maybe a couple people that are really closely looking at it. But just as of like the last couple of years, like as a community, everybody's starting to like work on it and come together. And it's pretty interesting now for me, because I definitely know some of the traits and I learn how they work, but it's pretty interesting. Now I can go back and I can punch in like breeder codes and like our network access storage on the computers and be like, oh, I think this animal, has this recessive trait or whatever. I can go back and look at every hatchling since 2005 from a particular pairing. So I can just punch in like the pairing code and it'll search the network access storage and it'll pull up, 60 photos of whatever animals from a certain pairing. So it's pretty interesting to be able to go back. So what I would tell you there is like a lot of those traits probably are, following some type of genetic, form, but it's hard when you have 5 or 6 things all interacting with each other to break them down. And like, you essentially have to work backwards, or you have to kind of work sideways on a project where like a project you might want to only breed for color. You almost have to like take a couple animals and breed them back to something else and see what comes from that. So it's kind of hard because if you're only wanting to move forward for like us, for an example, like higher white colored, or higher white collar kahua, or like the higher patterns is what's most desirable in the market from most people. Like I want to selectively breed towards that. But you have some other trait pop up, say an animal from a pairing that you just paired this year for the first time. You've been breeding both parents, right? Say for 10 years. Yeah. And then you pair a new pairing, but you've been breeding those animals for quite some time. And one of the 4 offspring looks like it's melanistic. Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, I'm breeding for color and pattern, Yeah. But like at the same time, I want to know what's going on with this one. So sometimes you just have to pick some of that stuff out and either start another project or whatever and see where it goes. In my case, in the past, it's been like, oh, that's interesting. And then I just sell it because I don't want to start another project. I don't want to have another 10 or 20 or 50 animals 2 years down the road just to see how it plays out for the numbers and stuff. So it's kind of hard because you have to kind of selectively work with obviously what interests you most. But there's probably more to it than it just being polymorphic. Totally. But you look at other stuff like the satanic leaf-tail geckos or mossy leaf-tail geckos, and some of those things will throw 5, 6, 7 different color variations or patterns and stuff. And there's likely something going on there, but who knows? You might have 3 or 4 different recessive traits all at play there. So you might not see anything, and then all of a sudden it syncs up and pops out. So
yeah, no, you're totally right. And I sort of, it's like laziness on my part to call it polymorphism, it's because it's just,
I did it for 15 years. So
I can't, dude, there's an added wrinkle with the Euros too, because, you might get females don't show much of their coloration until they're nearing maturity.
Yeah.
And then they might change from year 3 to year 6. They might look like a very different animal because they have that ontogenic color development. Right. And then your males, you might not know. You'd have to keep all the babies for 3 years, like an entire clutch for 3 years to know the way they're going to turn out. Because I've had individuals that spend 2 or 3 years of their life looking like they're going to be blue. And then in that 4th, 5th, 6th year, it's like almost overnight, there's all this yellow that comes in underneath that or over the top of that blue, and they turn into a green form animal. And you're like, what the hell, man? I thought you were,
that's tough.
And it's really wild. Like just like two particular examples from this season that were totally mind blowing to me is I had a female who is this really beautiful, like powdery blue, very little in the way of sort of secondary and tertiary coloration, just like maybe a little bit of yellow oscillations, but very, very, standard. I've been breeding her to the same male for the last 6 years or so since I got her. And it just so happened that male, like I retired him and I moved him to a new home. And so and he was a green form animal. So I've been breeding her to him for forever and getting sort of like these weird bicolor mixtures between the two of them. Well, this year I bred her to a totally like cobalt blue and orange male, thinking, well, they're both blue. Maybe I'll get some like heightened, maybe they'll all be mostly blue offspring. Well, dude, a full 50% of the clutch are like these lemon-headed green babies. You're like, what the hell, man? Like, and she was never throwing that with the other male who was green, like never once. And you're like, what the hell, you freaking jerk, like, but then
interesting.
But then you get the opposite where I had the first ornate female in 15 years. She laid a double clutch for me. I've never had that happen. I've never had an ornate lay more than once in a season. And she is a very, very vivid female individual, which is where very high color for a female, lots of green, lots of blue, just very colorful. And I've historically bred her with various males with some interesting results, but I put her in with a very emerald green male just for, it was an accident. Like they were just together for being in like an experiment in this huge pen, like an 8-foot by 5-foot pen, like this big experimental pen. They mate. She lays her second clutch, and good God, all of their babies. I mean, I don't want to, I've got the whole clutch of 13 of them, and I don't want to sell a single one because they're all looking so wild and so like clearly so vividly green already, like early on. And you're like, well, I have to know, like, I can't sell any of you. I've got to hang on to all 13 of you somehow. Which I don't have the space to do. And it's just like, it's a wild project. So, I wish I want more info, damn it.
Yeah, at least in my case, it's a little easier to keep a couple hundred animals, but man, it's amazing if you set aside a project and we, in our case, like right now, we're sitting on like 100 animals from one project we were just trying to figure out. And it's like, man, you sit on that stuff for 6 or 12 months. And it really hoses you long term because like we're set up for like X number of hatchlings per year and kind of like knowing how many we need to sell per month roughly before we're like loose bins on the floor. And now we're 60 loose bins on the floor and 100 eggs left to hatch, and shipping season's over. So it's like, it can definitely come back to bite you in the ass for sure.
Oh yeah. Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Wild considerations that we have to make to do this this wacky thing that we've all pitted ourselves into. I
noticed it's kind of funny because obviously we've alluded to this, but we haven't actually like fully unpacked it. But like what does your collection consist of currently? You know, I mean, obviously there's a New Caledonian focus, but within that, like, is there specific focus within New Caledonia, and do you have anything beyond that you're working with?
Yeah, so it's probably 60% like of the New Caledonian stuff. I would say it's 60% crested geckos, probably 30%. No, I'd probably say 50% cresteds, 30% kahua, and then a fairly equal breakdown of the remaining whatever percentage that is left. That I can't remember what percentage I said. What,
you got 20% left?
20% left. Thank you.
Math is hard.
Yeah. Probably an even breakdown of lychees, Saracenorum, and gargoyle geckos of the remaining. I don't keep any rough snouteds or the other Niaro gecko, Yalu, or the other that stuff. So, but it's a lot of kahua and a lot of crested geckos, and then we have just some other oddball stuff like a couple pairs of tokays, some Australian leaf-tail geckos,
Flying geckos,
Phelsuma clemeri,
Nice.
some little Lygodactylus, some Goniosaurus, Carphodactylus levis, which is like an oddball Australian species. What? Urodactylodes. So I guess some New Cal stuff too. We got two species of Urodactylodes. We got some Teratoscincus, which are the frog-eyed geckos.
Yeah. I was just telling Roy about that. I love those Kaiserlingi. Those are the most beautiful.
Yeah, dude. They're freaking wild, dude. Have you ever heard them like actually buzz the tail or anything?
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
Yes.
Yeah. And the way they tiptoe around and just like they're freaking wild, man.
They're pretty inquisitive little geckos too.
Yeah, they're super smart. They're really fun to watch. I was talking to Brian Susan a while back about I'd gotten an accidental order of like some superworms, which I never feed off to anything, and some of them had gotten out and turned into the beetles in the kahua cages, and he was like, "Yeah, nothing eats those things. I guess they just taste or smell terrible or something." I was like, "All right, I'll try it out." So I chucked one of the superworm beetles in with the Teratoscincus, and the one just comes ripping out of its hide and like touches its nose on it and then just like slow walked back. And I was like, damn, like this thing didn't even get its mouth on it. It literally like came at full speed and just hit the brakes. I'm like, these things must smell just freaking terrible. I don't know. I mean, they don't smell like anything to me, but I tried it a couple of different times, and every time the thing would just rip out of there and would not even put it in its mouth. It'll go after anything else.
Interesting.
The only things that I have that will eat like superworm beetles are my Egernia Cunninghamii. The Cunningham species. They'll eat them. They'll eat them up. They'll crunch them apart. But everything else I have, they ignore them. I smell them, frankly. Like when I pull.
I mean, I never really like stuck it right up to my nose, but it didn't seem like it was terribly offensive. But
I smell it on my hands when
it's like a pungent.
Yeah.
Like musky odor. Yeah, it's very specific, the superworm beetle odor. Nothing here that I have will eat them.
I didn't have a whole lot of them, but I just tried the couple that I found in there. And I didn't have great success with the soldier fly larvae either myself. But
interesting.
Nothing really went after them with too much gusto. But we've got some green keeled lizards too.
Cool.
Those are pretty fun to watch because I remember thinking that those soldier flies were super annoying when they'd get out of the cages where they morphed. And I was like, damn, these things are annoying. And then I saw a buddy post that his green keeled lizards love to hunt them. And so I found one somehow like 6 months after all of the other ones had like died off or whatever. One just popped out. And so I chucked it in there and it was instant. The thing was just like straight on it and hit it first try, like midair.
Oh, yeah. I have a Scoloporus that's like that. A Scoloporus yarravi. He'll catch them out of midair. Like I can throw them in on tongs, and he'll get them before they hit the ground every time.
And that's cool. It reminded me of watching the little lizards like around the waterfalls and stuff in South Africa.
The Platysaurus.
Just diving and just catching the flies and stuff. I could watch that shit all day. I think Sarah and I and our buddies like laid there for like 3 hours shooting photos and videos of those damn things just diving all over the place.
So good.
Super fun to watch.
Well, so this might be a great time to kind of ask you about that, about some of the field herping and some excursions, and sort of like what are some of the highlights for you? What are the things that motivate you about that? What do you learn from all of that? That's too much in one question, but
Well, our first field herping adventure out of country was we went to Australia in 2011. Yeah, 2011. So we had no idea what we were doing, but we had a great time, and it's just kind of nice to go out and explore and kind of bring your passion with photography and being outdoors and just appreciation for nature in general together. And we just enjoy going anywhere, everywhere. Seeing we don't always have a target species in mind, just kind of seeing whatever we can find, taking photos of that. You can.
When you go somewhere like that, everything's new. So
for sure.
I don't usually have a target species like she said, but there's certain things that you're hoping to find. But when we went to Australia, I think we only stayed in a hotel like 3 nights.
Yeah.
None of which we paid for. We kind of like stayed with a couple other people that we knew that were there for a night or two or whatever. We went herping with Willie Henkel and Emmanuel Van Hagen for a few days when we were over there. But other than that, it was just like literally camping on the side of the road and going to campgrounds to shower or whatever and seeing what we can find all over the place. So
I guess there was a symposium.
What's cruising around in the back of your? Oh, I think it was a fly. It went down your microphone or something.
But there is a fly. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It looked like it was going along like the back of your cages, and I was like, "What is that?" I've had a couple of fruit flies try to land on my nose, so I feel you there. I'm like swatting at stuff in here. But yeah, Australia was a lot of fun. We found a bunch of cool stuff there. And then we've done a couple trips with Brian Susan. He showed us around in Ecuador and Bolivia, and then we did South Africa with him and our friend Derek Dunlop, and then we've done some other stuff like Belize and Tanzania and Costa Rica and stuff. So we've gotten around a bit. Need to get out again.
Substantially more than I've done. That's incredible. Oh man.
Yeah.
Sounds like so much
impressive.
Fun. Yeah. That's really cool. Was there any of those places that stands out to you as like, just if you're going to like, God, I would go back again in an instant. Like, let's go right now.
Well, I mean, it depends on, I would go back to pretty much all the places, but as far as like ease of getting there, it's pretty hard to beat Costa Rica. I mean, you can get there pretty easy. You can get around pretty easy, and you can find a whole lot of really cool stuff in not a whole lot of space. But anywhere that's full on rainforest, like Amazon or anything like that is pretty wild, because like around here,
it's overwhelming, because like here we're just looking at the ground basically.
Yeah, totally.
Whatever we're looking for. And then there, like you're looking under leaf litter all the way to the tops of the trees for like every step you take.
Yeah, and sideways and backwards and everything. It's like we try to keep a relatively small group of like 3 to 5 people. Because we all do photography too, so you definitely don't want like 10 photographers all like pestering an animal for an hour trying to get pictures of it.
Yeah,
right.
But we'll have like the first person looking straight down, people checking the left and the right. Person in the back is turning around every 30 seconds to look for eye shine wherever they can, possibly pick it off or whatever. I will say that's probably something we've been getting a lot better at over like the last 10 years doing the photography stuff, is like, and I would say probably almost every photographer has done it, is like overshot an animal that you're like trying to manipulate and pose to a point where it's like not good for the animal. And I think a lot of people ultimately end up getting a lot better about that and just trying to snap off a half a dozen pics or a dozen pics and kind of being done. But that's something we've been definitely getting a lot better at, is like everybody wants to try to get like that epic shot, right? But you can't sit there and poke and prod something for 20 minutes.
No.
Like, especially at night flash photography, man. Like, that thing's going to go, it's either going to stress out so bad it doesn't eat for a week,
Yeah.
or it can't see for 2 days because you've been blasting it with flashes or,
Right.
whatever else.
Yeah.
So
Right.
some stuff to certainly consider if you're going to go out and do some field herping and photography. Like I'll definitely try to get in situ shots now. Whereas like before, be like, I got to catch it and I got to pose it for a picture. Like
Right.
snap a pic, move in, snap another pic. Cool. If you can catch it and pose it for a few photos, cool. Otherwise, like, just let it go. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's wild, man. Yeah, it's
all of the.
No,
go ahead, Phil.
Nope.
I was just going to ask of all of the herps you have seen, out in the field, if there's any, like, for each of you, if there's like one species or encounter that really stands out, it's just like a highlight. It's just a memorable one.
I think a lot of it would.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the animals are super cool, but sometimes the story that goes along with it.
For sure.
Mata in Ecuador was.
Yeah,
cool.
like this night in Ecuador, Sarah said this mata that we found in Ecuador it was just like a little one, so it's super pretty. But we found so much shit in like 20 or 30 minutes. Like it was freaking absolutely insane. It was like taking the photo of what's it called? I'm terrible with Latin names. The 2-line tree viper. It's Bothriops bilineata, right? Yeah. So we're shooting that. We're shooting some fertilances. We're shooting a tarantula eating a tree frog. We're shooting pipas, and Brian Susan's like, I got a mata over here, guys. And it's just like stacks of like super badass shit in like 30 minutes. I mean, just freaking unreal. And so you have stuff like that, or you have like, other stories that go along with finding super badass animals. I'm not going to get into the story that goes along with these ones, but like one night we got a horned adder, many horned adder, and coral cobra, and which are all freaking badass. But then like you have some stories that go along with that I can tell you guys maybe off the air that are just like
crazy,
just ridiculous stuff.
The frog night. In Bolivia was crazy. Our guide thought we were nuts because we wanted to go out in the middle of the night to look for, frogs and stuff. And he guided us to this spot we wanted to go to. And he just basically sat there while we spent probably hours.
3 or 4 hours. So the issue was it had rained like a freaking mofo for like 4 days where we could barely herp. Like it was raining so hard. And so we kind of get a little bit of a break and we hike out. I don't know, it's probably an hour from camp.
Yeah.
And we get to an area in the woods where it's all like ankle to knee deep water everywhere. And the guide was like, he's been working that area for like 14 or 15 years. He's like, I've only ever seen it like this like twice. But what it did was it just made everything go freaking insane. So you'd have like 3 or 4 species of frogs all calling. And then like every 30 minutes, one species would drop out and a new one would start calling. And so you'd get like, 10 or 12 species in like a couple hour time frame. You get it's the horned frog.
Yeah.
And then just like a ton of other different species of tree frogs. I got stung by a bullet ant on my finger that night. I was like, I spotted some eye shine like 10 feet up on like a little tree that was like this big around. So I pulled the tree down and I caught a clown tree frog. And I pull it down. I've got all my camera gear hanging with like the twin flash and macro lenses and stuff. And so I'm holding the tree frog and a freaking bullet ant just cruises right up my finger. And I felt it tickle my hand. And I was like, oh, fuck. And the guys are like, what? And I was like, so instead of shaking it off, I tried to blow it off. Because like I had all my camera gear, like I didn't want to like hit it.
Yeah.
So I try to blow it off and this thing's like, just like and so it just kind of like I tried to blow it off and it kind of cocked its head like a praying mantis does when like it just kind of like looked at me and then it just freaking drilled me right under the fingernail. On my shutter finger,
Oh my God.
And so
under the fingernail?
Yeah, like right under it. That's actually when I yelled the curse word. And they're all like, what happened? And I was like, I just got drilled by a freaking bullet ant. And so when I shook it off that time, I hit my camera, I knocked my twin flash in the water.
Oh no.
I'm like knee deep water, right? So I knocked the thing in the water and it ended up being fine, but my finger throbbed for about 6 hours or so after that. And then we found some freaking rad shit on the way back too. Mm-hmm. Like that night was pretty wild.
Yeah.
What were the freaking giant bugs? The huge lantern flies, the really massive ones.
Yeah.
The guide said he'd only seen like one in like the 14 or 15 years that we're there, and that he's been there. We found 3 in that trip. But I think it's because we're really like focused, and like he's not a herper, he's just guiding us around, So him being able to like see what we're doing and going out to try to find and getting out at night, because those guys never go out at night, So he's just learning kind of what we're doing and stuff, and it's pretty interesting doing those kinds of things. So yeah, but I mean, it's just so hard to pick a favorite. There's just so many stories that go along with all the cool stuff that you're finding, and I don't know. Yeah, I mean, even just seeing like a freaking bearded dragon in the wild.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
or like
the Carpedactylus.
Yeah, or the Carpedactylus levis, like in the wild, or like some species that are rare in captivity that you see, like the Australian leaf-tailed geckos, like the freaking massive ones. Finding those in the wild is pretty unreal,
For sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me,
we've had some great trips around the States too, like over in Borrego and down, in Tucson area.
Finding Gilas down in the Tucson area and stuff.
There's lots of cool stuff to find around here too. Well, not like around Iowa, but per se, but in the US.
Yeah. All of my herping has been done almost exclusively in the Southwest of the US. Like certainly not a complaint by any stretch of the imagination. You can find it's incredible. It's one of the coolest places to be. But well, I mean, I didn't really herp when I was in Costa Rica, because I was there this year for my honeymoon with Rach, and we did like a little bit of like what do they call it, incidental herping, where I'm like jacking around on the hotel grounds and stuff like that, and then we get on the river and whatever and do some cool stuff. But it wasn't the same as like, it wasn't proper herping, and so I'm kind of a little jealous. That sounds like a lot of cool stuff, but you really hit the nail on the head with like a lot of the story really kind of being what enriches the experience, in some way, right? It's not just going and seeing something in particular. It's kind of, how did you see it? What happened before you saw it? What happened after? And what was going on? And, there's so much to it.
Yeah. And, there's part of the herpetoculture side of things that's kind of interesting to me is like, I know some people that only keep, say, ball pythons, right? But they have basically zero interest or background knowledge of like even ball pythons in the wild. And I'm not saying everybody needs to know exactly where everything comes from, but you see it a lot with like, ball pythons and crested geckos and leopard geckos and some of these species that like are super cool. And obviously we keep a ton of them too, but where people just don't really ever get the appreciation for like the actual wild side of that animal. And I think you guys kind of got into it with Philippe and his episode a bit about that, and like just morphs and breeding for morphs versus like wild type animals and stuff like that. We're kind of stuck in the middle of all realms of that topic. We breed for morphs of some stuff for sure, and I find it very interesting, but like I could absolutely not just keep everything in shoe boxes. Like I'd feel horrible about it. I have like a moral issue personally with that. Like I have some stuff, like some of the breeders in like some really, pretty solid cages for what are about as maximum as we can deck them out when we have to tear them apart all the time looking for eggs. Like I don't want to go digging through 100 cages that are like fully decked out and planted, but I also need like some visual appeal, right? Like I need some cork. I need the animals to, have cool places to hide and stuff. And to be able to actually go out, to me, and find something in the wild is the actual tip top of like my favorite thing to do for sure.
Oh yeah.
Especially when you have a friend that's been like looking for something for 2 or 3 days, and then you show up and find it in like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Nothing really beats that.
You couldn't find it, you loser, dude.
Oh, you mean this thing right here?
Yeah.
It's like we have a friend that's been going down to West Texas for like 20 years, and I'm like, man, we got it. Like I know you want a road cruise, and like that's the best way to turn up a lot of numbers, but I can't take it for more than about 30 minutes. Like
All we were finding were little Aatrox that we were just flinging off.
Well, that wasn't the West Texas. That was that was Arizona.
Oh,
but we'll
Texas.
get to that one. Same guy.
Different trip.
Yeah.
And so he's been down there. He's found like almost everything you can find in West Texas, right? But he hadn't found Coleonyx reticulatus yet.
Oh yeah.
And so we're like first night out there. I'm like, dude, let's get out of the freaking car.
Yeah.
Like literally 10 minutes every 30 minutes that we're driving and I'll be fine. But I'm not just going to drive all night. So like literally the first time I get out of the car, I walk straight up to a reticulatus and he was like, I've been looking for those for 18 years. Or we're in Arizona and it's like, this is what Sarah was hinting at. We're driving. I'm like, I told him the same thing. I'm like, dude, I got to get out. Like every half hour, 60 minutes, like I got to get out for 10 or 15 minutes. I don't care if I find one thing when I'm walking around, I find 100 things on the road. It's more satisfying for me to like hike it up and find it. And so we're literally finding hundreds of freaking like tiny, like probably less than a week old, like Aatrox. And it's like, okay, stop for that. I got to a point where I like had a stick and I was just flinging them like 20 feet off the road. Because I'm like, the thing will survive this, but it's not going to survive getting run over by the car, you know, that are the cars that are coming. So I'm like, peace out. I'm like, I do this like 100 times. I'm like, dude, we got to freaking get out. We finally stop. Sarah pops off like this massive blacktail rattlesnake. Wow, and while they're photographing that, like it was less than 15 minutes out of the car, I got a Gila. And I'm like, I got a Gila over there. And our buddy's like, is he serious? And Sarah's like, yeah, he's probably serious. He's like, he doesn't get super excited for much. And I'm like, yeah, I got a freaking Gila over here. Like, I'd rather find the one Gila and the blacktail and like hiking around than 100 Aatrox on the freaking road.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. Like I have a friend who has a tortoise farm in Arizona. And when we stay out there, he's always gracious when I've gone out there and let me stay at his place. And it's kind of like, it doesn't feel the same because I've seen like, I don't know, 3 or 4 Gila monsters at his place, but it's like, they're there to eat the tortoise eggs that are being laid in the ground. It feels like shooting fish in a barrel, man. I'm like, this isn't fair. You know, like it's not the same thing. Like if I'm out and I hike one, it'll feel so much cooler, and I'll feel like I actually found one instead of like
versus one that's kind of a pest for your friend.
Totally. And you know, you also touched on a subject a moment ago that's sort of like near and dear to my heart at the moment. You know, the whole, you know, morph versus wild type discussion thing. It's one that I think about a lot. I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I think it's interesting. I've been drawing this similarity between herpetoculture and like my art education in some way. You know, in some ways it's like how is the good way to say it here? Like being, you know, you see artists who say things like, well, you know, if you're not really drawing from life, if you're not painting from life, then it's like you're kind of missing the point, you know. And I think there's a similar feeling for people in herpetoculture, in that, you know, if you're not paying attention to sort of the natural history and the context in which the animals you work with came from, then it's like it just feels a little less. It feels like you're missing something in a way, you know, and it's such a strange thing because, yeah, I definitely know people like what you were just talking about, where people who they work with bearded, you know, maybe a bearded dragon, or they work with a leopard gecko, they work with something, and they couldn't tell you the Latin, they couldn't tell you where they came from, they couldn't tell you, you know. We were just having a conversation with Frank Colachico of Reptilian Diaries, one of the last episodes we recorded. And he noted the weirdness, like the strange disparity between, or I don't know if disparity is the right word, but the weirdness around the fact that crested geckos were once thought to be extinct, right? And now you can find them at PetSmart. Like that is the weirdest thing in the world. And how many people are going to come into PetSmart and know that about, you know, formerly Rhacodactylus, now what is it? Is Coralophus or something like that now? Yeah. You know, hey, you know, like it's just it's a cool thing. And I'm intrigued because on the one hand, I agree with the sentiment that people should know as much as they can about what they're working with. And then at the same time, I can also understand like how many people, well, actually, I should probably ask some people before I make this generalization, but like how many cat breeders, dog breeders, horse breeders, or chicken people who keep chickens, how many of them know sort of like the native origins of those species and what they're working with? Do they know that like, where were wolves first domesticated into dogs, or at least the best guess that we have for that? Do you know where the horse evolved? Like, did you know that it evolved on the North American continent and then, moved around across the land bridge? Or, what about chickens? It's like, do you know that the sort of the wild ancestor to the chicken is still alive or in like Singapore and southern China? Do you know this? It's like, it's weird. But I also wouldn't necessarily fault them for not knowing it, but I totally would fault someone working with Uromastyx who doesn't know that ornates come from Egypt, Israel, and Jordan. I'd be like, hey, dummy, what are you doing? You don't know? Like,
yeah.
Right.
It's kind of tough. And I don't know, I think you touched on it a bit in one, something kind of related. It might've been the one with Philippe where he discussed like some things that might be stressors to animals that, potentially make them stronger. And, I've got, some people will like, incubate crested gecko eggs at 68 degrees.
Yeah.
Because, in theory, they get better head structure. The head gets wider and the crests get longer and stuff like that. Or you get people that incubate them at 82 degrees because you can get like brighter reds or, whatever. But the head structure goes just straight to total crap. But some people will incubate like at certain extremes, but in the wild, those eggs never, ever stay sustained at those temperatures.
No.
Ever. So I had a friend that was doing some research on spiders and different egg, incubation temperatures. He's like incubating them at sustained low temp, sustained high temp, and then a fluctuation of like, say, 72 to 78. And like, at least in his studies with the spiders, like the ones that had the temperature fluctuation were way more hardy. They've been subjected to different temperatures. So they basically emerge ready for more environmental changes in their lives. So they do better with feeding and just overall everything. And I feel like you probably see a lot of really similar stuff with, animals. I find, at least on my side for like the New Caledonian stuff, like I accidentally figured out like the head structure stuff and some color stuff when I was trying to do some temperature sex determination studies like 15 years ago. And ultimately came to a point where I'm like, I'm not incubating that warm because their heads look freaking terrible and nobody wants to buy them. But at a certain point, you go below and they are essentially lethargic, right? They've been like stunted. Yeah, they've incubated for 40, 50% longer. And like they might have some better structural features, but overall the animals just don't do as well. So like we do 72 to 78, just whatever the room temperature fluctuates to, and get equally as nice of animals. But
that's why our spiders do well too.
Yeah, maybe that is why the spiders do well in
there. There, we figured it out. There's your spider answer.
Now we gotta freeze them out.
Right, man. Yeah, it's super bizarre, and like the part of the reason that the sort of the morph topic is intriguing for me at the moment is because I've like recently made the call to get involved with at least one Uromastyx mutation, which is
I caught that on that episode.
Yeah, and it's a wild. He's a crazy looking animal. It's an albino Uromastyx J-Rye, and Jesus Christ, he's nuts. I mean, he's one of the gnarliest looking creatures I've ever seen. Like, holding him in my hand, it's just like Jesus, and I even have my qualms with the idea of like wild type. It's like, well, this animal, the originator occurred in the wild. I mean, how is an animal that occurs in the wild, even if uncommonly, how is it not wild type? Like that is a wild type creature, and
well, that brings me back to one of my most interesting finds that you guys had asked me about that I completely overlooked because
how dare you? How could you?
I wasn't field herping when I found it.
Oh, okay.
I found a scaleless plains garter snake.
Whoa.
What?
And the thing was pretty wild looking. I've got photos of it. I'll have to send.
Was
it
it
to
an
you guys.
adult or was it a juvenile?
No, it was like probably like a week old.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
yeah,
It was epically small. So Sarah was actually playing a disc golf tournament, and she had played really well that day and was actually getting into like a tie to make it into the finals for like a Final Four thing.
Yeah.
And it had just freaking rained like crazy that day. And her competitor was like walking down the sidewalk, and I literally like jumped in. She was like mid step on top of this thing, and I like scooped it up. And I was like, this is right before the playoffs started. I was like, look, Sarah, it's a Lucky Charm. And I just like, I didn't even look at it that close. It was soaking wet, right? It's just a tiny snake. And then she wins in the first hole. And I looked at it closer. I was like, holy shit. Like this is freaking, like this is freaking scaleless. And
Right.
so like at the time, like I knew there were scale. This is like 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I was like, at the time I looked at them like, I mean, I know there's like scaleless corn snakes, right?
Yeah. And
So
bearded
I'm like,
dragons.
I don't know, but I don't know. Like at the time, I'm like, I don't know if like this is like a semi-normal like occurrence in the wild. I know I've never found one. So I posted on like field herp forums, and like everybody freaking shit their pants.
Yeah.
And so that kind of goes back to like, it was a wild animal. I have not really much interest in breeding garter snakes, but I'm also kind of interested in trying to breed this thing to see, you know, in theory, it should be a recessive trait and it should reproduce. So I did keep it for a couple of years. I didn't get any offspring, and unfortunately it passed away. But I had a local, like really well-known garter snake breeder that somehow lives like 15 minutes from me that kind of gave me a couple of, you know, plains garter snake, like nice blizzard albino plains garter snakes to breed to it, and a bunch of other stuff, kind of set me up and make sure I wasn't going to kill the thing, you know? But pretty interesting wild find.
Yeah. Dude, that's nuts. I don't know if I've told this story before on the show, but I found me and my friend Nick Dokai, we found a wild albino redback chuckwalla.
That's cool.
Wow.
We found it in the crevices, you know, we were just poking around, and I remember shining, you know, you might take like a signaling mirror or like glass on your phone, and you shine it into the crevices to see if there's anything in the crevices, right? And I remember shining my light into this light into the crevice and seeing like, that's a weird looking chuck, you know, but it was like, you're not really going to tell for sure until you really get it out and get your hands on it. And it was like a large juvenile or small subadult female. And we got it out of the crevice, and I was just like, whoa, we're like, this thing is totally different and weird. And so then we came back the next, or actually, I think it was like spring when we found it. And we came back in October of the same year, and we found 3 baby albinos. And then,
interesting.
And then Nick came back the next spring and found an adult female, a wild adult female albino.
Wow.
So clearly that's going around, and obviously doing, I mean, you'd think with an animal that has to freaking bask that much that thing would not thrive or do well. Like it would kind of make sense for, you know, a Xantusia or like, you know, something like that might kind of work out. But that's pretty wild. They're like, we have melanistic gray squirrels around here and stuff. Kind of works out. It's a natural mutation that just kind of works because it doesn't really have a disadvantage to being black.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
It stays warmer up there.
Here in Arvada, in Colorado, there's melanistic foxes that run around all the time. And you're just like, what the hell? Like a weird black fox. It's cool. Like, and it, you know, the two things that always come to mind for me are, I mean, how many times do you see like either cave dwelling or deep sea dwelling animals that are naturally albino? They're all albino. You know what I mean? It's like they're just all the natural occurring ones are an albino or something, some weird
or damn near albino if they're not.
Yeah. And then
we saw. Go ahead.
No, please, you.
I was just gonna say we saw an albino rock hyrax in Tanzania.
What?
Yeah, I was like, I had the binos out, and I was like, guys, I'm like, it was way out. It had to have been like freaking.
Some pictures.
It had to have been like 100 yards, right? At least.
Yeah,
it was like 100 yards out, and I just see this little white thing jumping around on their rocks. It's like, is that freaking albino rock hyrax? I'm assuming it was albino. It could have been leucistic,
right?
But our guide Well, the guide was first off was pretty fascinated with me having a red afro and blue eyes. So this was like near the end of the trip. He's like, "It's kind of like you, Andrew." Just being very unique looking, I guess. But
that's amazing.
So that was pretty interesting. And then we found a 6 foot long Sicilian.
Oh yeah,
in Ecuador that beats the longest recorded Sicilian by 12 inches.
Oh. Holy moly.
So that's wild.
Insane.
Coming out of the ground. It's insane.
Wow, what a trip.
Was it like heavy rain when you found it, or?
It was very wet. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like kind of working in and out of like a mossy, like tree root, like buttress tree type area. And it was just kind of like working in and out of there. And so like my buddy like started like trying to pull it out carefully because it's like in and out of everything, you know, like when a snake goes in and it's like super hard to like, so it took like 3 or 4 of us like carefully holding on to pieces of it and like pulling it out without injuring it. And, you know, I don't feel like it was that much bigger around than like a 2.5 or 3 footer that we would find, but just lengthwise. So it just kept freaking coming and coming and coming. And it took like 3 or 4 of us to freaking get the whole thing out because you could only see a few inches of it at a time when he first like spotted it.
Right.
But it was pretty wild.
Amazing.
You guys didn't decompress its spine and stretch it out a little bit, but
we probably stretched it out like a 6 or 12 inches, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like
record,
it. Well, and then, you know, I don't remember who told me this. It could have been Roy. It could have been Brendan, the guy who helps me out at the shop. But someone like pointed out to me some conjecture that like the fragmentation of habitat might be leading to an increase in just stumbling across genetic variants just due to fragmented habitat. You know,
that would kind of make sense. You wouldn't really think about that. Like, it doesn't necessarily have the opportunity to outcross with something else that might then knock those genetics down, or you know, decrease the chance of two hets actually meeting up and producing a scaleless or albino or whatever.
And then also at the same time, you know, you have all kinds of lore, right? Like depending on what part of the world you're talking about, there's all kinds of lore about like, well, when an albino buffalo pops up, that means there's going to be, you know,
crazy drought or crazy rain or tornado.
Right. Which is to say that it happened enough for people to have lore around it, you know, like it was common enough to be like, you got to watch out for those white buffaloes, dude. It's a real problem, you know, like, So, you know, and now that doesn't also mean that there wasn't habitat and population fragmentation at the hands of native people either. That's not what I'm saying either. I'm just saying it's like an intriguing, it's just intriguing to think about, you know, it's pretty weird stuff. Well, so we're coming up, like we're creeping up at 2 hours here. And I've, sometime in the next 20-ish minutes or something, I'm going to have to go because my wife and I are going to go see my mom's for dinner.
Cool.
But before we do that, there's we do have just a couple of questions, and then sort of our closer question before we do that. Roy, I want to give you a little more room to hop in because I can just talk.
Oh no, that's fine. You've been asking a lot of the same questions I would be, so it's all good.
I like hearing your voice, man. You got a great voice.
Yeah. Oh well, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like kind of on the spot now.
I don't like that feeling either.
Okay.
Well, it was like one of those moments where like my brain just went totally blank for a second. But I mean, I was curious about like, what about? I mean, we've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but if there's something about New Caledonian species specifically that have captivated you, you know, is it anatomical characteristics? Is it the way they look? Is it the way that you keep them? What about it has allowed those species to have such staying power for you?
I mean, even if you just took a wild type crested gecko, like I think that's a freaking cool animal. Like it's a really nice size animal. Like they feel super soft, like just structurally, like overall size. I mean, the fact that, you know, you can get by with feeding it a meal replacement powder essentially. And you're not restricted to having crickets or roaches or something on hand all the time, we do anyways.
Mhm.
But like all of those things are certainly pros. Essentially room temperature, don't have to have artificial lighting. I mean, there's so many pros, and I've gotten to a point now where like I don't force anybody to handle or look at anything. But one of my favorite things, like if we're at a reptile show and somebody brings somebody there that has zero interest in reptiles and they just came along,
Yeah.
and like you get them to kind of like look at it and they're like, all right, yeah, that's not like a snake and it's not like slimy or scaly or whatever, right? And you get somebody like that to like touch one or handle it or something like that when before they had zero interest in it. I think that's one of my favorite things, whether it's a kid or an adult or whatever. And then I mean, obviously all the colors and morphs and patterns and stuff. And then you've got
the Kahua are like, they're kind of on a different level for the New Caledonian species. They're pretty smart for a gecko, like up there with tokays, we would say. So it's fun kind of seeing their different characteristics and stuff with each individual gecko. So cool too.
But yeah, just I mean the colors and patterns, and obviously you got like lychees, which are freaking huge and super cool. There's so much variety and just the overall like care and conditions needed to have them really do quite well are not difficult to achieve. So they're fantastic for beginners or as advanced as you want to go with how elaborate you want to set the cages up or whatever. And then I think you guys have kind of hit on this a little bit in some previous episodes, but it's nice to offer, I can sell a crested gecko for $50 or thousands of dollars. It's really nice to have like a species that like you can get somebody into as like their first pet, or they can go as crazy as they want with however much money, they might want to invest in it or something. So I like to keep a variety. We keep like a bunch of morning geckos and stuff here too. So just like having the variety and price points, like I think it would be for me difficult to only keep like higher price point animals because I want to be able to get stuff to anybody that might be interested in keeping a reptile. And I feel like if you're only keeping animals that are $1,000, like that's going to eliminate 99% of the population that might be interested in possibly getting into something like that. So
yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say that's definitely a lot of it. There's just so much variety and color and patterns and everything going on with the different species. And at least on like the Kahua, like the fully prehensile tail is pretty wicked. It's super strong. And I mean, they'll just wrap that thing around and hang on, and their eyes are super wicked. And
they're really cool lizards. I was just admiring some Kahuas recently at a friend's shop opening. They had a few of them there, and nice. I'd never really spent time to just like sit and look at one up close for a while. And I was like, yeah, these are actually really amazing creatures.
Yeah, initially, like if you just
get so obsessed.
Yeah, initially, if you just see like a baby, they're usually like brown and like not super colorful, and then the color kind of like comes in
I've seen
as they get bigger. So you see a little one, you're like, it's got its tail curled up like a snail, it's just like all coiled up. And you're like, it's kind of cool, but you don't get like a full appreciation, in my opinion, until you get to interact with like a subadult or an adult, and just like see the size and like just the overall like build and strength and stuff of an animal that size is pretty cool.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Well, I've got another question that I would feel remiss if I didn't ask Sarah about, like, what is the overlap for you or relationship between your disc golf passion and your herpetoculture passion?
Yeah.
Well, I guess as far as like how often I go disc golfing versus or what
I guess I just mean like, how does it all fit together? Because it seems like that's like another thing that's like really, a big part of your life.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if it's like, is it something that like helps you like get away from herpetoculture and like decompress and just like get into a different mode? And I'm always curious about that kind of thing because
most times, but sometimes the competition gets stressful too. But oftentimes I find myself when we're out on the course, like especially when we're like down in Tennessee or somewhere like that, like herping while I'm playing around. So it kind of actually brings both things together, like, and that relaxes me in the middle of a round too, just to distract me from whatever might be going on. So
sometimes there'll be like a hole or two backup where it's like, I'm going to be sitting here for 10 minutes. So one time when we were in Tennessee, Sarah pops up. She's like, hey, check it out. She's got like an adult rough green snake that she just just pulled off of something. And so it's pretty interesting. I don't like to scare anybody. I like to give people the opportunity to like come and check something out if they want. But like most of the players, both the men and the women, know now that we're like super into this shit. And so they'll like, if they find something, they seek us out to find out what it is. Or like if we find something, most of them are pretty interested, even if they're not like super stoked on snakes, they'll at least learn about it. So Sarah had caught that rough green snake, and we got some other players to like take photos with it. And then literally before the next hole had started, I'd caught a garter snake that saw cruising, and the people are just like, what is like, where are you guys coming up with this crap? I'm like, it's literally everywhere. Literally everywhere. We had players in Virginia that were like, oh, pretty sure we got some copperheads over here. And usually that's a northern water snake or something, you know?
Right.
But sure as shit, there were like two copperheads banging like 10 feet away from the basket. And I was like, all right. I'm like, those should probably move. So like I was able to get sticks under both of them and like move them off to a brush pile, and they stayed hooked up the whole time. So
amazing.
That's awesome.
But it's funny, like at the one course, there are a couple of like the commentary, like live commentary guys that like go around and do stuff. And a couple of them are into herping too. And some of the other players will take out herping on trips.
Nice.
And so the one guy got a timber, like maybe a yearling timber while the round was going on. And so they had coverage of the little timber cruising out of the course. And then the other guy helped in the middle of his round, helped one of the guys get a copperhead in a bucket to relocate and stuff. So we kind of help out, at least like educate some of that, you know, some of those people, but at least maybe have an appreciation for things, and like, don't just shove your freaking hand or your leg like in a bush.
Yeah, watch where you're
without looking first.
Probably a wise piece.
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
I'm always just curious about that, like how the different things that we take on overlap like that. So I'm glad I asked that question.
Well,
I'm glad you asked.
Definitely the priority goes to obviously like making sure everything's taken care of here, but we also
have to get out of the house.
Yeah, I mean, we probably were gone like 10 to 12 weeks for like disc golf this year. So,
oh wow,
yeah, I noticed that. I noticed that like just being like friends on Facebook, it seems like it's like a big part of what y'all are doing, big part of your life. And
yeah, it's like a minimum for a tournament. If it's like kind of close, it's a minimum of 3 to 4 days. Which when it's that, we can usually just cycle feeding to like not hit during that. Like we stagger feeding. So it's like, okay, we still have somebody pulling hatchlings and like checking on other things and like doing things here. But if it's, you know, sometimes we're gone for a week or 2 weeks straight, like a couple times throughout the season, or we try to hit a vacation for herping or whatever. So,
right.
Love it.
Excellent stuff. Very nice. Well, so then I have one more question before the kind of closer, and like the basic question is, what does the future look like for you guys? Like, do you guys have sort of any particular goals or projects that you're kind of looking to achieve in the next X amount of time, or is it more of a maintain, keep steering the ship straight kind of thing? What's the future look like for the two of you?
Well, I don't think we're really looking to grow numbers necessarily. I feel like we're pretty maxed out in the space that we have. Sure. But maybe cut back on, breeding some of the crested geckos or something, and then start focusing on, I don't know, the Kieserling eye or something like that, just to kind of mix things up a little bit, and not have quite so many of the same species or whatever. But I don't feel like we're really going to increase the numbers too much anyway.
Yeah, I think that's something that we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, but we never really got into it, is just like trying to keep things interesting and not overdo it with the numbers. A lot of people will be like, all right, I'm going to pair up a freaking 100 crested geckos. It's like, all right, well, are you ready for 1,500 babies?
Right.
Because you can definitely get 1,000 to 1,500 hatchlings in, that number of animals. I mean, even pairing up 20 or 30, you can very, very easily have 300 or 400 hatchlings. Like, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've got some animals that have produced 16 to 20 eggs in a season. And it's nice that they're staggered every month. But at the same time, it's like, man, I mean, it definitely builds up. Like we're going to have eggs and hatchlings from right now, not even hatching until March of next year.
Wow.
You know, and it's just it's gonna be constant. So trying to like make sure you don't get
males. Like,
yeah, that's with pulling males in freaking June or May. You know, they can retain sperm for 12 months plus sometimes. So, but yeah, just trying to keep the numbers like at a semi comfortable. I think Phil Tremper kind of hit on that too, is like trying to keep in your zone and trying to keep the numbers to a point where you still can go do something else that you want to do and not just feel like you're stuck in your basement 24/7 and stuff like that, or be able to travel or whatever.
Yeah, I don't feel like we have much of a desire to hire help. Like we don't want to get so big that we have to hire somebody or not be checking on we like to be able to look at the animals and
we have a very
what's going on.
We have a very fantastic helper for when we are gone, and she absolutely loves it, which is super great.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So shout out to Melinda if she ever watches this, because she's a freaking absolute lifesaver. But yeah, Melinda, finding good help is tough.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah,
I need to find somebody for when I go camping and stuff, just to have some more eyes over here.
Yeah. Brian and I talked a little bit about that when we had our show with him, because I know he's got a guy who helps him out. And I had recently at the time brought on someone to help me at the shop here. And it's, boy, you want to talk about something that makes you uneasy. That's and thanks,
especially when you got a guy like Brendan.
Yeah, Brendan, the worst, dude. What a loser, man. He's awesome. We had him on the show too, and it worked out because the dude's a rock star. He's like a super sweet.
Yeah, he's great.
He's really dedicated, and he brings a lot to the table. So it's not just it's not as simple as like I just pay him to pick up poop. It's like he's a bigger role, and he's
he actually pays attention and looks at the animals and knows if there's an issue and they need to be split up or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, he's noticed stuff that I've missed completely, and he's made suggestions about what we ought to do for, he's like, if you thought about maybe if we do this, and I'll be like, I hadn't thought about that. Let's give it a shot, man. I'm like, it's really great too, because he's like a little bit younger, and giving him the opportunity to be like, look, you want to try something? Go for it. Like even if I know the answer, like
run it by me first, but let's chat about it and give it a go.
Yeah, man, let's do it. It's great. He, and sometimes it surprises me. Like he's caught things happening that I would have missed, just purely by accident. Like it just so happened that I was in the other room feeding baby Euros, and he was out in the big room catching the butterfly agama females mating. Like the two females are copulating somehow. It's like okay, I know. Yeah, it's like, all right, weird. And then it was 2 days after the male was copulating with one of the females, and we were like, all right, these are really some amorous butterfly agamas. Let's go.
Got some hyena action going on there or something.
Yeah. So but and then there's been other stuff too, other suggestions he's brought to the table. But and it's weird. I would have said, I have said in the past, like, I can't imagine growing to a point where I need help. And in this sense, it wasn't growth that did it. It was the desire to pursue a secondary career option that would help me do a little bit more and have a little bit more like freedom in some ways. Actually, it's kind of restricting.
I could see trickling somebody in for a few hours, a couple times a week or whatever. But to just rely on somebody all the time or have somebody on full time, I don't really want to get to that point. We were actually offered, for a stretch, we were strongly considering moving out to California to help Alan.
Oh, wow.
And I was basically just going to go through all the stuff you normally like wholesales and pick the highest end stuff and either set up breeding groups for that or just, select those animals and photograph them and sell those. And that ended up not working out just because we didn't, Sarah had got her vet tech certification in California and we were looking at houses and stuff. We ended up not doing it. And then when Alan got out of everything, he offered me his gargoyle collection and his Petco contract. And I was like, I have no interest in producing that many animals. Like, it seems like it just take all the fun out of it. It's interesting to go and visit a facility like that and like go through the animals and whatever, but like to be locked into that just seems like it would zap all the enjoyment out of it for me.
Right.
And then to help here, I mean, we do have like a bunch of stuff set up on like misting system, like a super advanced misting system that's pretty killer, and some other things that at least help kind of keep things going for if we're just gone for a few days or whatever. But
yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Well, Roy, do you want to throw out the closer here?
Yeah.
Or, no?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, our closing question, it's the same on every show. You've probably heard it if you listen to a couple of the others, and it's why herpetoculture? And that could be, why do you do it? Why do we do it? Why does it matter?
Why does it
Why
matter?
herpetoculture?
Yeah. I mean, I think the best answer is why not? You know, I mean, there's so many reasons to do it, and there's so many reasons to have hobbies or interests of any kind. You know, I'm still going to make fun of my friend for going to like an anime convention, but like, I understand it. And I'm like, we're joking, but I understand it from a perspective. Like, I go to reptile shows and people think I'm a freaking dork for doing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there are people that collect rocks, and there are people that, you know, breed tarantulas or bugs or keep stamps. They don't breed stamps. I don't think that probably works, but you know, I mean, there's so many things.
That's how they do it.
Yeah, the stamps are over there copulating in the corner, sticking together. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's so many freaking cool things, and when you're as like detail oriented and like fascinated by just like either how stuff works or like the intricacies that you can find in like colors and patterns and stuff, whether it's, you know, a tiny little bug or a freaking badass lizard or whatever, like I'm all for it, and I just get fascinated by that stuff. So
awesome.
I think the educational side of it is rewarding too. Like he was saying, at the reptile shows that we go to, there's nothing better than seeing a little kid's eyes light up when they see a crested gecko lick its eye for the first time or something like that, you know, where they just have no idea. Or like even our nephew, he's gotten really into ants and like developing these colonies of ants and building terrariums for them and intricate terrariums. He's 12 years old. He went to a show with us last week, and I think it really opened his eyes. Like, I could do, like, people do this, like, you know. So
got his first praying mantis, and then the guy that he got him from like was answering all of his questions and everything. At the end of the show, he came over and gave him another species. He's like, here, try this one out, man. And this kid was so jazzed. I mean, at 11 o'clock in the morning, he asks the dreaded question, how much longer is this going to be? And I'm like, dude, the show opened like an hour ago. And I'm like, hey man, it's like another 4 hours. He goes, okay, good. And his face is up. And I was like, all right. I'm like, this is good. And then like nearing the end of the show, he's just like, that was a really fun day. Like this kid is, you know, not super social, but a lot of us aren't like in those kind of situations unless you get somebody that's dorking out over the same stuff. And he was just super pumped the whole time. So that kind of stuff keeps us going for sure.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. Really good great answer to the question. I love it. Thank you for that. Where can, I mean, we'll have like links and whatnot in the show description and whatnot, but where can people find you guys and what you're up to on the internet?
lacherps.com. Same for LAC Herps for Instagram and Facebook. We mostly post photos and just interesting stuff on Instagram that then trickles into Facebook. But yeah, those are going to be the main three, and anybody can shoot us any messages or just follow along if you want to see some dope pictures of gecko eyeballs or, you know, whatever.
He's serious about the photography, so you got to do it.
Yeah.
It's come a long way since the tokay on the carpet.
Yeah, we should do a before and after photo of like a tokay from that old school one, because it's like,
yes.
I would love to see the pointillistic tokay for one. Yeah, I'd love to see it.
I'll try to find it. It's really bad.
We need photos for the quote tile that we release every episode, so maybe you could send me that one for that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Oh my god.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to find it for you. Honestly, you probably won't have to shrink it down. The full image is probably like this big.
Oh my god.
Perfect. That's even easier for me.
Yeah, that'd be so funny because so many of the ones that we make are like these really like I used to make them, and then Roy took over the duty, and he's way better at making those quote tiles than I am. And like we go through a lot of pains to make like nice looking pictures to put a quote on and have like a basically like a cover for the episode, basically, right? And it would be so funny to have like this just like this ratty picture of a tokay gecko.
Total dog shit photo that you couldn't even take one that bad if you like manually tried to make it that bad.
Oh,
you absolutely couldn't do it.
That'd be awesome. Oh my God.
I guess you probably could if you took the original image and then you shrunk it down to like this big and then you blew it up like this big and then you cropped that and then you did that a few times. You might come close, but
oh my God, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. Oh my God.
I love it.
Oh, we got to do it. Okay, sweet. Well,
I think our visual died, so it's a perfect time because my battery died on my camera.
Yep,
perfect
there
timing.
It goes.
Perfect timing. Well,
all right. Well,
the camera knows
thank you so much, y'all. It's been a pleasure, and we'll definitely have all the links posted, and look forward to the next time we all get to chat.
Sick. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, guys.